This is a watershed moment for Europe, and Ukraine is part of our European family. It is also a watershed moment for Ukraine, from Ukraine to Russia to NATO. He wields outsized influence in both the East and the West. In recent days, there have been many scenarios on how the war between Ukraine and Russia could end. We've had serious discussions with Russia and have received strong signals that they are ready for peace. Wouldn't that be beautiful? Wouldn't that be beautiful? Now, President Zelensky, after those talks, says he is still willing to sign a minerals deal with America, but security guarantees are still necessary. The US and the EU are taking different paths. The US side argues that Kyiv has spent more than $300 billion on military expenditures and that a deal based on Ukraine's mineral resources should be signed to cover this. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and US leader Donald Trump failed to agree on a deal during their last meeting. Following the meetings, Zelensky stated that he was ready for a mineral agreement. Following this statement, the US cut military and intelligence support to Ukraine, while the EU preferred not to leave Kyiv alone, including $800 billion in aid. France announced that it would provide Ukraine with intelligence. In the meantime, Turkey, which has the most strategic role in the Black Sea region, has defended Ukraine's territorial integrity, demanded the return of Crimea to its rightful owner, and called for an end to this war. The Ankara government even considered sending peacekeepers to Ukraine. US President Donald Trump has not spoken out against the peacekeeping mission. Trump even reported that Russian President Vladimir Putin had agreed to the EU or any other party sending peacekeepers. Turkey, on the other hand, has once again positioned itself at the center of diplomatic efforts to resolve the Ukrainian conflict by suggesting that it would provide peacekeepers to Ukraine in line with the US statement. Following high-profile visits to Ankara by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan dramatically reaffirmed the willingness of the Ankara government to mediate. Erdogan praised US President Donald Trump's initiative to end the war and emphasized Turkey's unique role in shaping what he called a new equation for peace. In line with Erdogan's remarks, Donald Trump has already endorsed an agreement under the Istanbul Convention, which Turkey presented in 2022 to bring the war between Ukraine and Russia to peace negotiations. The government in Ankara, which has made breakthroughs in both diplomatic and military fields, has become more prominent in ending the war between Ukraine and Russia by calling on the European Union. Turkey's efforts were supported by the Polish side. Both countries announced that they would come together to join forces. Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk announced that he will visit Turkey to discuss the resolution of the crisis between Ukraine and Russia and Europe's security intervention. The visit to Turkey was announced by Prime Minister Donald Tusk himself. Tusk said that Poland has started exploring non-standard formats to enhance its security, and this will be on the table during his visit to Turkey. Everything shows that Turkey is ready for this, Mr. Tusk said, stressing that the talks will focus on how Ankara can increase its involvement in Europe's regional security efforts. Tusk said his visit to Turkey was about Ankara's official role in ensuring regional stability. We will now take a much deeper look at what Turkey, backed by Poland, plans to do to end the war between Ukraine and Russia. We will discover how Erdogan is positioning himself in this regard and how he can stop Russia together with the EU without departing from the US doctrine on the negotiation process for a peaceful end to the war between Ukraine and Russia. We will discuss how Poland can support Turkey in this regard. First, let's take a brief look at what Turkey has done for Ukraine so far. Turkey hosted direct peace negotiations between Russia and Ukraine in Istanbul in April 2022, shortly after the Russian invasion. These talks led to a temporary agreement that secured grain exports across the Black Sea but ultimately failed to curb Russian aggression. Since the start of the war, Turkey has sent mixed signals by providing armed drones to Ukraine and closing its straits to Russian naval vessels while at the same time refusing to sanction Moscow. The Ankara government did not hesitate to allocate the first corvette Hetman Ivan Mazepa to Ukraine as part of the island project for the Turkish Navy. TB2 drones were also among the important military resources provided by Turkey to Ukraine. The Ukrainian armed forces took delivery of Cobra tactical vehicles developed by the Turkish company Otokar and achieved significant success against Russian forces on the battlefields with these vehicles. After the first flight of the Khan, Turkey's new fighter jet, the government in Ankara indicated that Ukraine could be involved in the project. In addition to such supportive steps towards Ukraine, Erdogan has also taken important preventive decisions against Russia. One of them was the suspension of Turkish banks' lira transactions with Russia. Ziraat, the Turkish state-owned bank, the country's largest asset holder, refused to transact in Russian rubles. The move was seen as one of Turkey's most drastic measures against Russia. But above all, the peacekeeping mission announced by Turkey to prevent the crisis between Ukraine and Russia has become one of the most critical issues of recent days. Turkey, which has NATO's second-largest army, may join the peacekeeping mission in Ukraine as part of Trump's efforts to reach a ceasefire with Putin. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan raised this possibility in separate meetings in Ankara with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov. Most recently, after the talks between the US and Russian delegations in Istanbul, Erdogan surprised the world agenda by making his decision on this issue. Erdogan's stunning decision to deploy troops put Turkey in a critical position, potentially easing the burden on European allies such as the United Kingdom and France, which were planning a European-led mission to Ukraine. Both France and the United Kingdom had indicated that they were willing to send troops to Ukraine as part of a broader security package to ensure the validity of the peace agreement, but only if the United States provided a security measure and approved the initiative. These countries have now been joined by Turkey.